St. Mary's General Hospital, a paragon of medical excellence in a wealthy suburban community, is about to face a significant challenge as a talented black nurse, Allie, joins the team. Allie had no idea that deep-seated prejudices awaited her, and as tensions escalated, so did conflicts. What surprises lie in store? Stay tuned. Before diving into the story, let us know where you're watching from. If you love dramatic twists and moments of justice, don't forget to subscribe. St. Mary's Hospital gleamed under the morning sun, rays streaming through rows of impeccably cleaned large windows, highlighting its magnificent and modern facade. Inside, a constant flow of people moved about, with patients, relatives, and medical staff bustling through like a never-ending stream. The sound of surgical cartwheels rolling across the floor echoed through the expansive hallways. In this bustling environment, a group of new nurses was undergoing their first orientation. They were fresh faces filled with enthusiasm and energy. But among them, Allie stood out with her confidence and determined gaze. Her glossy black skin was a clear contrast to her new colleagues, not just in color, but also in the fiery passion she brought. Allie walked alongside her new colleagues, her mind filled with plans and goals for the future. She had long awaited this moment, from the lengthy days of studying at medical school to the sleepless nights in emergency rooms, to stand where she believed was a solid stepping stone for her nursing career. As the group passed the reception area, some people's gazes shifted to follow the new nurses, and although no words were spoken, their curious and contemplative looks spoke volumes. Miss Margaret stood in front of the group, holding a small notebook she often used to note important points. She began introducing the hospital with a clear voice that carried an undeniable authority. "Here, we adhere to a very strict set of rules," she said, eyes sweeping across each face. And when her gaze fell on Allie, her tone sharpened. "We value professionalism, relentless dedication, and above all, the ability to collaborate with every team member. This requires each one of us to fully understand and comply with the conduct and dress code regulations." Miss Margaret paused, her gaze probing. "And part of that involves maintaining a professional image. We do not allow any personal style displays that could affect the perception of patients or colleagues." She paused again, focusing intently on Allie's distinctively styled afro hair, neatly maintained. "For example, non-traditional hairstyles," she continued, her tone implying disapproval. "We must ensure nothing about our appearance makes patients feel uncomfortable or distracted. This includes maintaining a neat, traditional, and appropriate appearance." Though Miss Margaret framed her words within the context of general rules, it was clear that there was a specific message aimed at Allie, making the atmosphere around her increasingly tense. The other nurses glanced at each other, some appearing uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Allie felt everyone's eyes on her, but maintained her composure, despite the turmoil inside. She knew she had to prove she deserved to be here, not just with her knowledge and skills, but also with the fortitude to face any challenge, including unspoken prejudices. After laying out the conduct and dress code requirements, Miss Margaret turned and pointed toward a woman standing not far away. This woman, Ina, the head nurse, stepped forward confidently. She had short, neatly trimmed dark brown hair and keen eyes that meticulously observed the group before her. "Welcome to St. Mary's Hospital," Ina said with a deep yet authoritative voice. "I am Ina, the head nurse here. I will assist you in familiarizing yourself with the workplace and ensure that you quickly integrate." As she spoke, Ina moved along the line of new nurses, her gaze pausing briefly on each. But when she looked at Allie, there was a swift, meaningful glance. Although it was just a fleeting look, it was enough for Allie to feel a distinct coolness from Ina. She continued, her tone serious. "We are all part of this team, and cooperation is key to our success. I expect each of you to contribute fully, especially in maintaining the high standards of patient care our hospital is known for. I will be the first person you come to with problems or questions," Ina added emphatically, "and I am here to help, not just to supervise. We will work together, learn from each other, and most importantly, care for our patients with all our dedication and expertise." Allie's initial days at St. Mary's Hospital were not as easy as she had hoped. Despite being mentally prepared to face challenges, the actual discrimination she received from Ina, the head nurse, weighed heavily on her. Ina, in her managerial role, frequently monitored Allie's daily tasks and never missed an opportunity to challenge her. One Monday morning, the hospital atmosphere was already buzzing early. Allie, full of eagerness, was arranging medical tools in the waiting room according to the procedures she had been taught. Everything was tidy, from syringes to bandages, each item neatly placed on the tool shelf. While Allie was double-checking to ensure everything was ready for her shift, Ina entered the room with quick, decisive steps. She looked around the room professionally before her icy gaze landed on the row of tools Allie had just arranged. "We have a consistent way of doing things here, Allie," Ina began, her tone sharp with reproach. She pointed to a small tray that Allie had placed at the end of the table, not in its usual position. "I don't understand why you haven't followed this. This tool," she emphasized the tray, "needs to be placed differently. As stipulated, don't make things chaotic." Allie, feeling uneasy under the gaze of her colleagues but still maintaining her composure, responded gently, "Ina, I followed the manual and placed them exactly as instructed. This tray," Allie pointed to the tray Ina was referring to, "is stipulated to be here in case of emergencies for easy access when needed. I've checked it twice." Ina frowned, clearly not pleased with the answer. She moved closer, staring at the tray, then back at Allie. "No matter how many times you check, you must ensure that everything is placed exactly where it belongs, not just according to the book. And I want them in the old position. That's how we do things here, and you need to adapt to that." Allie nodded, not wishing to argue further. "I understand, Ina. I'll be more attentive and ensure everything is placed exactly where you want it," she said, and began rearranging the tray as per Ina's instructions, while the eyes of everyone in the room still followed her every move. This exchange, though a minor part of daily tasks, emphasized once again the tension and pressure Allie faced while working at St. Mary's Hospital. Less than a week later, during a team meeting of nurses, Ina criticized Allie in front of everyone. The cramped meeting room, with chairs lined up along the walls, and the cold fluorescent light accentuated the stifling tension. "We need to seriously reconsider the quality of care we provide," Ina stated, her tone stern, her eyes fixed on Allie. "Some newcomers here seem not to understand that. Quality is not only about doing it right, but doing it until no one can find fault. I hope everyone gets this, especially those who have just joined." Ina's words felt like a cold breeze through the room, making everyone silent, the tension palpable. Allie decided she could not remain silent. She swallowed, then gently raised her hand, her eyes firmly meeting Ina's. The room quieted in anticipation, all eyes on her. "Sorry, Ina," Allie began, her voice calm but clear. "I would like to understand more about the mistakes I've made. Could you please specify what I did wrong or didn't meet the standard?" Ina, seemingly taken aback by Allie's forthrightness, furrowed her brows for a few seconds before responding. She paused, regaining her composure and confidence in her voice. "Yes, I will tell you," Ina said, still stern. "For instance, last week you failed to notify me about adjusting the medication dosage for a patient, even though there was a change in their treatment plan. This is a serious communication error that could impact patient safety." Allie listened and nodded, recalling the situation. In fact, she had reported to another nurse when Ina was not available, but clearly the information had not been efficiently relayed. "I apologize for that misunderstanding, Ina," Allie responded, her voice firmer. "I did report it to Department Head Margaret when you were unavailable. However, I realized that I should have made sure that the information was recorded and directly communicated to you. I will be more careful in the future and ensure that any important changes are immediately brought to your attention." Allie's professional and responsible response earned her some respect from her colleagues, who began to see that she was not only someone who could stand up for herself, but also a competent and accountable nurse. However, this did not ease Ina's anger. On the contrary, she felt challenged in front of the other nurses and was dissatisfied with how Allie handled the situation. Ina's face tensed, her expression hardened, and her voice rose, filled with irritation. "Listen, Allie," Ina began, clearly frustrated. "I am the head nurse here, and the procedure is that you must directly inform me of any changes concerning the patients. Your choice to report to someone else when I'm not present is not how we do things. I need to be aware of everything to be able to supervise and ensure patient safety. She looked around the room, her gaze sharp, and continued, "The way you handled it only shows that you lack experience and do not understand how we operate here. When you work under me, you have to follow my instructions and make sure you comply with the rules and procedures. Understood?" Ali took a deep breath, trying to hide her confusion and pressure. She looked Ina directly in the eyes, her voice still calm but firm. "I understand, Ina. I will make sure that all important information is directly reported to you, regardless of the time. I commit to strictly following the procedures and learning from every piece of advice you give to improve patient care." Yet, deep down, Ali knew she had to find a way to adapt to the current situation while still protecting her personal principles and dignity. Her response was not just about soothing the situation, but also showing her determination and resilience under pressure. She hoped that her patience and professionalism would eventually be recognized and respected at the hospital. She knew the road ahead might be difficult, but she was prepared to face and overcome the challenges. At the end of the workday, Ali stepped out of the hospital, the weight of the stressful hours still lingering in her mind. She pulled out her headphones, put them on, and pressed play on her favorite music. The strong bass and deep melodies helped her regain calm after a challenging day. Standing under the dim streetlights at the bus stop, Ali watched the stream of people and vehicles rushing home. While waiting, she reflected on the day's events. The feeling of being underappreciated, even looked down upon due to unfair biases, left her extremely tired. She wondered whether she could continue to endure and stand strong in such a high-pressure and unfair work environment. As the bus stopped and the doors opened, Ali stepped on with heavy steps. She closed her eyes, seeking comfort in the memories and teachings of her mother. Her mother's warm yet decisive voice echoed in her head. "Ali, my dear daughter, remember that you are always stronger than you think. Don't let anyone dim your light. You have the strength to fight and win, no matter how great the challenges ahead." These words from her mother were not only encouraging, but also a guiding principle for Ali during tough times. She recalled the long days of hard study at nursing school, the sleepless nights spent preparing for exams, and the intense shifts during her internships under significant pressure. Despite the exhaustion, she never allowed herself to give up on her dream of becoming an outstanding nurse. She also remembered the pride and joy of holding her diploma, knowing she had not only overcome difficult challenges, but also achieved the goals she had set for herself. Each drop of sweat and tear she had shed was not only proof of her relentless effort, but also a testament to her endurance and determination. In the dim light at the bus stop, Ali stood quietly watching the stream of people and vehicles hurry home after a long day. While waiting for the evening bus, she pondered the challenges of the day. The feeling of being underrated and unrecognized due to unfair biases made her tired and discouraged. She wondered if she had the strength to continue enduring and remaining strong in such a pressurized and unfair work environment. As the bus stopped and the doors opened, Ali stepped on with heavy steps, her mind heavy with thought. She closed her eyes, seeking comfort in her mother's teachings. Her mother's warm and decisive voice echoed in her mind. "Ali, my dear daughter, remember that you are always stronger than you think. Don't let anyone dim your light. You have the strength to fight and win, no matter how great the challenges in front of you." Her mother's words became a beacon guiding Ali through these challenging moments. She recalled the long years of relentless effort at nursing school, the sleepless nights spent studying for exams, and the stressful shifts when she first started her career in nursing. Despite being exhausted, she never allowed herself to give up. The pride and joy of holding her diploma, knowing she had not only overcome harsh challenges but also achieved her goals, warmed her heart. Every drop of sweat and tear she had shed was proof not only of her relentless effort, but also of her capability and determination. These memories reminded Ali that, regardless of any difficulties, she was not just surviving them, but was meant to conquer them. With resilience and determination, she knew she would continue moving forward, not just to prove her own worth, but also to inspire others. As Ali was immersed in thought, a gentle hand tapped on her shoulder, pulling her from her deep reflections. Startled, she opened her eyes, turned around, and saw David, a male colleague, standing there with a gentle smile. In his hand was a water bottle, which he offered to Ali. "Hello, Ali. I thought you might need this, David said, his voice gentle and caring. He sat down next to her on the bench at the bus stop, his eyes full of sympathy. I saw you were a bit stressed after today's meeting. It can't have been easy. Allie smiled tiredly and took the water bottle. Thank you, David. It really was a tough day, she admitted, unscrewing the cap and taking a small sip. David nodded, his eyes conveying deep empathy. I understand. And I think you handled everything very well, Allie. Unfortunately, we are not always recognized for our efforts. But the important thing is that we know our own value. Allie nodded, appreciative of David's support. You're probably right. Sometimes I just feel overwhelmed, she said. But knowing I'm not facing it alone really helps me feel much better. David smiled. Exactly. We're all here to support each other. And if you ever need anything, just let me know. I'm always willing to help. He looked out at the busy street ahead, thoughtful. And who knows, maybe together we can make this environment better. I believe change can start with us. Allie felt her spirits lift, knowing that even in the shadow of challenges, the light of support and friendship could illuminate her path forward. She knew that with the backing of colleagues like David, she would not only overcome the current difficulties, but could also contribute to creating a fairer and more positive work environment. Allie understood that to overcome the challenges and discrimination at her workplace, she needed to be stronger professionally. With this resolve, she enrolled in a series of advanced medical training courses, starting with an emergency response techniques course. This course was specially designed to equip nurses with the necessary skills to react swiftly and effectively in urgent medical situations. In one memorable training session, Allie faced a simulated scenario, responding to a patient experiencing a severe heart attack. Under the supervision of emergency experts, she quickly assessed the patient's condition, used an electrocardiogram machine, and respiratory support devices. She also needed to inform the doctor and prepare an emergency treatment plan. Her prompt and accurate response in the simulated situation not only earned her praise from the instructors, but also admiration from her peers in the class. The lead instructor publicly commended Allie in front of the entire class, emphasizing her ability to remain calm under pressure and make quick decisions. Allie has demonstrated excellent emergency response skills, a critical aspect of the medical profession, the instructor said. This praise not only bolstered Allie's self-esteem, but also encouraged her to continue striving to become a better nurse. Alongside the emergency techniques course, Allie also participated in seminars on effective patient care approaches. These seminars focused on building trust with patients, and Allie learned to practice active listening and deliver difficult news. Her progress in communication skills and empathy at these seminars also earned accolades from healthcare educators, further enhancing her credibility and respect among colleagues and patients. With each class, Allie not only improved her professional skills, but also developed her communication and empathy abilities, thereby solidifying her position and influence within the hospital. These skills not only helped her become a better nurse, but also laid a solid foundation for facing any professional challenges at work. On a quiet afternoon at St. Mary's Hospital, Allie visited the room of Sophia, a middle-aged woman with chronic illness who had been in the hospital for several weeks. Sophia, with her gray hair and always appearing tired on her gentle face, lit up with comfort whenever the young nurse visited. Allie smiled warmly and approached the bed. "Hello, Sophia. How are we doing today?" While gently taking Sophia's hand, Allie carefully checked the readings on the health monitor. Sophia responded with a weak but warm voice. "Allie, thank you for coming. I always feel better when you're here. You make everything seem easier." Allie sat down next to the bed, creating a comfortable space for conversation. "Thank you for saying that, Sophia. I'm glad to hear it. Is there anything in particular that's worrying you?" Sophia slowly shared her concerns about her illness, the sleepless nights, and her worries about the progression of her condition. Allie listened patiently, occasionally nodding or gently stroking Sophia's hand, showing her deep empathy. When Sophia paused, Allie gently offered advice on managing stress and pain, applying the latest knowledge she had gained from her training. "It's wonderful to have you here, Allie," Sophia said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You not only help me medically, but you also make me feel genuinely cared for. You're very good at your job, and I'm lucky to have you as my nurse." As the conversation continued, Sophia began to describe new symptoms: constant pain along her left arm and an unusual feeling in her chest. Recognizing the seriousness of these symptoms, Ali decided that a more thorough examination was necessary. "I'm worried about these pains," Sophia admitted with an anxious expression. Ali responded with a look full of understanding. "We'll check everything thoroughly right now," she said, checking Sophia's pulse and blood pressure, then using a stethoscope to listen to her heart and lungs for any abnormal signs. After completing the examination, Ali smiled reassuringly. "I'll inform the doctor about your condition and ensure we monitor it closely," she said, preparing to enter the data into Sophia's electronic medical record. "We may need some additional tests to better understand the cause." The meticulous and professional care Ali provided not only reassured Sophia, but also demonstrated the combination of professional skills and empathy Ali had developed through her training. These skills not only enhanced Ali's ability as a competent nurse, but also built trust and comfort for patients like Sophia during their most challenging times. Suddenly, an alarm sounded from a heart rate monitor in the next room, tearing through the hospital's quiet. The sharp sound immediately tensed Ali. Her eyes quickly glanced towards the door, and the sight in front of her heightened her concern. A young nurse stood by the door, her face panicked, her hands trembling with a phone, but unable to speak. Everything seemed to freeze for a moment. Ali knew something serious was happening. "Sorry, Sophia, I'll be right back," Ali said quickly, then hurried out of the room, running towards the sound of the alarm. As she entered the next room, the scene before her made her heart race. A middle-aged man was gasping on the bed. His chest heaved unevenly, his breathing nearly halted, and his complexion was nearly ashen. The man's heart rate on the monitor was plummeting, each beat weaker than the last. The young nurse beside him had tried to provide first aid, but the terror in her eyes showed the situation was beyond her capacity. "We need to call the head nurse immediately," the nurse said, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry. Ali immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. There was no time to wait. "There's no time," Ali decisively said, her eyes lighting up with determination. "You update the doctor and prepare the crash cart. I'll handle this." She didn't wait for a response. Quickly moving to the patient's side, she quickly checked for vital signs. The patient's heart had stopped. With no other option, Ali immediately began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. The skills she had practiced in training were clear in her mind, leaving no room for error. She placed her hands on the patient's chest and began strong, regular compressions. Her counting echoed repeatedly, each compression a battle against death to reclaim life. Time seemed to stand still. Each glance at the heart monitor was a moment filled with tension. The heart rhythm was still erratic. Sweat began to roll down Ali's forehead. The pressure increased with no signs of improvement. With each passing second, the tension in the air grew heavier. "Oxygen bag now," Ali commanded, her voice firm with intense focus. The young nurse rushed to fetch the oxygen bag and quickly returned to the bedside. Ali continued the compressions, feeling the faint heartbeat under her hands, but she did not stop. A minute, then two, passed in the thick air. Ali kept up the compressions while another nurse provided oxygen. She knew the patient only had a few minutes to sustain life. The heart monitor still showed no positive signs. The heavy, tense atmosphere enveloped the room. Then, like a miracle, Ali saw a slight movement on the monitor. The heartbeat began to fluctuate again, weak but present. "Keep going, we're making progress," Ali shouted, motivating both herself and her team. The young nurse tightened her grip on the oxygen bag, supplying more air. Seconds later, the heartbeat stabilized further. The patient's breathing resumed, his eyes twitched slightly. Ali and the other nurse nearly held their breath, waiting for the life-and-death moment to pass. As the professional medical team rushed in, they took over from Ali, but she knew they had won the battle against time. She stepped back, feeling the tension dissolve, but her heart still racing. Sweat soaked through her back, and her hands trembled after maintaining the rhythm to save the man on the bed. The patient was out of danger, and she knew that her actions over the past few minutes had saved his life. The attending doctor turned to her, eyes full of respect. "Ali, you did very well. If you hadn't been here, the patient might not have made it." Ali said nothing, just nodded, her heart filled with joy and relief. In those tense minutes, she had truly surpassed herself, proving that no matter how great the pressure, she was capable of saving a life. At the end of that day, as the shift ended, the group of nurses gathered in a small meeting room to debrief the day's work. The atmosphere was a bit tense, likely due to the emergency that had occurred earlier. Allie sat in the corner of the room, still feeling relieved after saving the patient, but also a bit nervous about everyone's reaction, especially Ina, the head nurse. Ina entered the room with an expression that hardly revealed her emotions. She started the meeting by reviewing the routine reports from everyone. When it came to Allie, Ina paused, her eyes briefly passing over Allie before she spoke in an even tone, yet with a hint of sharpness. "I've heard about the emergency situation Allie handled today," Ina said, her voice devoid of any praise or acknowledgement. All eyes in the room turned to Allie, some still admiring her actions, yet no one voiced it. "I think that in such emergencies it is essential to call the head nurse immediately," Ina continued, her tone becoming colder. "Even though you reacted quickly, the procedure requires you to inform your superior before taking action on your own. This ensures that we handle everything according to protocol." Allie felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to Ina's words. She had thought that saving a patient's life would at least earn her some recognition, but instead, Ina focused only on her failure to follow procedure. Feeling not just unjustly treated but also hurt, Allie understood that these criticisms weren't just about her work. The room fell silent as everyone's eyes focused on Allie, waiting for her response. Allie knew this was a pivotal moment, and she could not remain silent. Taking a deep breath, Allie decided to speak up, trying to keep her voice calm, yet unable to hide her anger and disappointment. "I understand the importance of procedures," Allie began, her eyes fixed on Ina. "But in today's situation, there was no time to wait. A patient's life was hanging by a thread, and every second could decide between life and death. If I hadn't acted immediately, the patient might not have survived." Ina crossed her arms, saying nothing, but her icy glare conveyed disapproval. Allie knew she was entering a difficult confrontation, but couldn't back down now. "And I want to be clear," Allie continued, her voice beginning to shake, not from fear, but from a buildup of emotions. "I know what you're doing isn't just about me not following procedures. Everyone here knows that. These criticisms aren't about how I work, they're because of my skin color, and that's unacceptable." The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavier. Some nurses looked away, unable to meet Allie's gaze, but others, sympathetic and supportive, seemed to also recognize the unfairness Allie was enduring. Ina stood silent for a few seconds, her face darkening. "This isn't about color, Allie," Ina responded, her voice tense. "It's about the job and following procedures." Allie stood her ground. "No, Ina, it's not just about procedures. It's about you being unable to accept that I, a black woman, can work as competently, even more so, than others. Everyone here can see that. My saving a patient today should have been recognized, but instead, you focus on trying to bring me down, and I'm tired of it." The room was silent, no one daring to speak, but now all eyes were on Ina, waiting for her reaction. Ina remained still, her face stiff, as if unable to speak further. She hadn't expected this direct confrontation from Allie, and now she didn't know how to respond. The tension in the room became even more suffocating as Margaret stepped in, her tall stature exuding a chilly authority. She stood in the middle of the room, her eyes sweeping over all the nurses, lingering longer on Allie and Ina. She didn't need to say a word, but the tense and pressured atmosphere was palpable in everyone's eyes, awaiting her direction. "Everyone out!" commanded Margaret, her sharp voice cutting through the silence. "I need to speak privately with Ina and Allie." Everyone immediately stood up, no one daring to object. Colleagues glanced at Allie with worry, but did not intervene. As the door closed, only Allie, Ina, and Margaret remained in the small room. Margaret stood facing Allie, her expression stern, clearly displeased. Margaret turned to Ina, nodding gently as if to reassure her, then turned back to Allie with a cold, sharp look in her eyes. "Allie," Margaret began, her voice steady but authoritative, "I have been informed about today's incident. While you acted swiftly in an emergency, your failure to follow protocol is unacceptable. Allie took a deep breath, maintaining her composure, but she knew this confrontation was unavoidable. Margaret, I understand that procedures are important, but in that situation, there was no time. The patient was in critical condition, and if I had waited to report, he might have died on the spot. Margaret raised an eyebrow, her icy gaze becoming more disdainful. That's not the issue. The problem is that you did not follow the head nurse's directions and disregarded the procedures. Here, we do not condone impulsive actions, regardless of the outcome. Allie felt anger rising within her. Impulsive? I saved a person's life. That's not being impulsive, that's being responsive and decisive. You're criticizing me for not following procedures, but can't you see that I acted to save a patient's life? Ina, standing silently beside them, curled her lips slightly as if waiting for Allie to be subdued. Margaret did not miss this, and instead emphasized her tone even more. Allie, you're misunderstanding the issue. This isn't about the outcome. It's about following the steps correctly. You're not the one to decide what's more important. That's the responsibility of those more experienced than you, like Ina. Allie felt her fury bubbling up. Really, Margaret, this isn't just about procedures. From the first day I stepped into this hospital, I felt discriminated against by you and Ina. This isn't the first time I've been treated unfairly just because I'm different. Margaret narrowed her eyes, her face colder than ever. What are you implying here, Allie? This isn't about your skin color. This is about professionalism. No, Margaret, this is about discrimination. Allie raised her voice, unable to hold back any longer. Everyone here sees it. Since I started working here, I've been scrutinized and criticized more than anyone else. Ina criticizes me not because I do wrong, but because I am black. And you know it. Margaret stepped back, her face tense. Ina, now clearly worried, stepped forward trying to interject, but Margaret gestured for her to be silent. You have no right to accuse me like that, Allie. I have worked here for decades, and I have always upheld fairness. What you are saying is completely unfounded. Allie looked Margaret straight in the eyes, her own eyes blazing with determination. You can deny it, but that does not change the truth. I have witnessed it, and I know exactly what I am facing. I saved a patient's life today, but instead of being recognized, I am criticized over something trivial. If I were not black, would you do the same? The room fell into a heavy silence, a thick tension enveloping it. Margaret stood still, her face growing colder, but her eyes betrayed her anger she was trying to suppress. You are crossing the line, Allie. I will not let these baseless accusations disrupt our work environment, Margaret said, her voice chillingly sharp. If you cannot follow procedures and respect your superiors, then perhaps we need to reconsider your position here. Allie understood Margaret's intent, threats to silence her, to prevent her from standing up against injustice, but she would not back down. You can threaten me all you like, but I will not stay silent. If you think driving me out of this hospital will make me give up, you are mistaken. I will fight for justice, not just for myself, but for everyone who has been unfairly treated like me. Allie's words echoed in the room, filled with challenge and determination. Ina remained silent, not daring to look directly at Allie, while Margaret looked at her with a rigid face, unable to respond. No one spoke further, but it was clear that the confrontation was not over. Allie left the room, her heart heavy, but also filled with resolve. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew she would never give up. Not now. Never. It was beginning to get dark, the dim streetlights casting a faint glow on the deserted street. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension, but couldn't stop thinking about her confrontation with Margaret and Ina. That evening, instead of taking the bus, Allie and David walked slowly through the quiet space and gentle breeze on their way home. The dim yellow lights shone down, creating a calm and contemplative scene. Allie was still immersed in thoughts about the day's events, but the feeling of being listened to and encouraged by David made her feel somewhat lighter. They walked side by side, no need for further words. David's presence beside her was enough to make Allie feel less alone in her daunting battle. With each step in sync, they seemed to share not just their strides, but also the heavy emotions in their hearts. As Allie walked further, she suddenly stopped, not out of fatigue, but because she felt something profound stirring inside her. David stopped too, his eyes looking at her with deep care. They looked at each other for a moment, no words needed. Perhaps the closeness, the empathy between them had grown over time. In that moment, Allie felt a strong connection between her and David. Without saying another word, David gently reached out and took Allie's hand. The simple gesture was full of warmth and comfort. Allie looked down, feeling the firmness and reassurance from his touch. David softly said, his voice warm, "I'm here with you. You're not alone. You don't have to face this alone. You did the right thing, and everyone around sees that. Don't let them shake your confidence. Rest assured, things will clear up." Allie smiled faintly, feeling the comfort spreading from that handhold. Her heart felt lighter, as if the burden had been shared. Although the future was still unclear, she knew she wasn't facing it alone. Beside her was David, a solid presence amidst the many difficulties and challenges. They continued walking, hands still clasped, in silence. Over the weekend, the atmosphere at St. Mary's Hospital became busier than usual. The hospital's annual meeting was about to take place, and all staff, from nurses to doctors, were required to attend. This meeting wasn't just a time to reflect on the hospital's achievements, but also a crucial moment to address ongoing issues and improve the work environment. The hospital director, Eddie, entered the meeting room with his usual calm and friendly demeanor. He wore a neatly tailored suit, not overly stylish, and his presence naturally commanded authority. As Eddie entered, all eyes followed him, and the atmosphere of the annual meeting suddenly became more formal. Margaret and Ina, who were chatting in a corner, immediately changed their demeanor upon seeing Eddie. Ina, usually cold, became artificially cheerful and friendly. Margaret, typically arrogant, straightened up, displaying a busy, sociable smile, as if she was always dedicated to her work. "Hello, Director." Ina spoke first, her tone attempting to convey warmth, though clearly forced. Margaret quickly followed. "It's great to have you here today, Eddie. We've prepared thoroughly for this meeting." Eddie nodded slightly in response, his expression revealing little. After a brief introduction about the hospital's achievements over the past month, along with the existing challenges, Eddie moved on to the main part of the meeting. He talked about patient care quality, advancements in medical technology, and the improvements the hospital had made. The atmosphere in the room was routine, with polite nods from the staff. But at one point, Eddie suddenly paused. His gaze swept across the room, from those sitting in the front to the last row, each person feeling drawn into his focus. Eddie's tone became slower and more contemplative. "I have seen many things that make me proud. Staff who work diligently, always putting patients first," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "But I have also seen things that deeply disappoint me. Some seem to have forgotten why they are here, to serve patients and to create a fair, professional, and kind environment for everyone, not just for patients, but also for their colleagues." The room fell into a sudden silence. Eddie's words were no longer just a reminder. The tension spread throughout the room as people began to realize that he was alluding to something serious he had directly witnessed. Eddie paused, took a deep breath, and continued with a stern look. "I have personally witnessed discriminatory behaviors and disrespectful remarks among colleagues. I have heard conversations where some people are not judged based on their abilities, but because of irrelevant factors like their skin color or gender." The atmosphere in the room became heavier than ever. All eyes turned to Eddie. Some people sat motionless, while others began to realize that he was directly addressing certain issues and individuals in the room. Eddie stood straight, his gaze sharp. "I have heard unfair criticisms directed at Allie, one of our best nurses. She saved a patient in a critical situation, but instead of being recognized for her ability and effort, she was criticized for reasons that have nothing to do with her competence. This is unacceptable." Eddie's words rang clear and decisive, a strong statement that left the room in utter silence. Everyone listened, realizing this was not a usual annual meeting. In the back row, Allie sat quietly, stunned and moved. She never thought the hospital director would stand up for her in front of the entire hospital. Eddie's words were an affirmation that the injustices she faced were finally recognized and addressed. Whispers began to buzz around the room. Many were surprised by the director's directness, while others, especially Ina and Mrs. Margaret, appeared worried and confused. Both sat rigidly, their eyes furtively glancing towards Eddie. sensing the impending fallout. Eddie scanned the room again before speaking, his voice decisive yet calm. "I think it's time we face the truth. To make everyone understand what I'm referring to, I want you to look at the screen." The lights in the meeting room dimmed, and all eyes focused on the large screen at the front. For a moment, the room was enveloped in darkness and tension, as if everyone was waiting for something unpredictable. The screen lit up, and the first image that appeared shocked many. On the projector screen, a heated confrontation between Allie, Mrs. Margaret, and Ina from the day she saved the patient was displayed. The video recorded every word and gesture clearly and indisputably. Mrs. Margaret's voice rang out, cold and disdainful, harshly criticizing Allie. Ina's demeaning attitude was evident, her smirk malicious as she stood by observing. Allie, determined, strongly countered both, denouncing the injustice she endured. The atmosphere in the meeting room became more oppressive than ever. Everyone sat frozen, their eyes glued to the screen as the truth unfolded. As the video concluded, the room fell into tense silence. All employees' eyes turned to Ina and Mrs. Margaret, whose behaviors were now laid bare. The dissatisfaction was evident on many colleagues' faces, creating an uncomfortable and stifling atmosphere in the meeting room. The screen continued to play. "That girl Allie really doesn't know her place," Ina said, her voice full of contempt. "Just because she saved one patient, she thinks she's a hero. Ridiculous." Mrs. Margaret stood beside her, nodding in agreement, her face clearly satisfied. "Exactly. It's unacceptable. She thinks she can outdo those who have been here for decades just because of one act of saving someone. Allie needs to know her place in this hospital," Mrs. Margaret continued, her voice calculated. "Exactly. We can't let this slide easily. Allie will never be recognized for that act. Sooner or later, she will be kicked out of here," Ina chimed in, her voice cold. "Just because she saved a patient doesn't mean she'll be praised, but she doesn't understand that it's not that simple here," Mrs. Margaret added emphatically, her tone distinctly discriminatory. "She's also black. People like that never follow the rules. They always do as they please." The conversation between Ina and Mrs. Margaret was clearly filled with malice and discrimination, exposing their prejudices against Allie. The video stopped, and the atmosphere in the meeting room grew heavy. Everyone was silent, no one daring to speak. The contempt and discriminatory behavior of Ina and Mrs. Margaret in the video were too evident to deny. Their venomous words had been laid bare before the entire hospital. Eddie stood up from his seat, his eyes full of disappointment and resolve. "What you have just seen is the truth," he said, his voice echoing throughout the room. "There is no justification for this behavior. This is not an issue about procedure, but about discrimination and disrespect towards a colleague." He turned to Ina and Mrs. Margaret, who now looked pale, unable to hide their confusion. "From today, both of you will be suspended to facilitate an internal investigation. Discrimination and injustice have no place in this hospital. We work not only for patients, but for a fair environment where everyone is respected and judged based on their actual capabilities," he continued, his tone serious yet calm. "We are here not only to treat diseases, but also to create an environment where everyone, whether patient or colleague, is treated fairly and with respect. What we have just witnessed is not only a violation of work ethics, but a betrayal of the trust the entire hospital places in us. Such behavior is inexcusable." Eddie paused for a moment, letting his words sink into everyone in the room. The atmosphere remained silent and stifling, no one daring to move or speak. "We cannot grow. We cannot become an advanced and humane hospital if those in charge behave like this. Discrimination and prejudice not only harm the individual targeted, but also undermine the entire moral fabric of the organization." Eddie looked intently at everyone in the room, the seriousness of his speech causing all to silently listen. "From now on, I ask each of us to be accountable not only to our patients, but also to our colleagues. We must ensure that everyone is treated fairly, without exception. The actions of Ina and Mrs. Margaret not only violate ethical rules, but also betray the trust that this hospital has placed in them." He took another step forward, his voice deepening but carrying significant weight. "If any of you witness injustice or discrimination, I hope you will not remain silent. Speak up. Protect what is right. This is our hospital, a place where every patient and every staff member deserves respect, humane treatment, and fairness. After Eddie's final words, the room fell into a deep silence. No one dared to say anything further, as they all understood that a major change was impending. Eddie's words were not just a reprimand, but a call to action to build a better, more equitable, and more humane hospital. Allie sighed with relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt recognized and protected. She contemplated deeply and decided that she needed to thank Director Eddie for speaking up for her and bringing justice. She stood up and quickly walked toward the director, who was still at the front of the room, organizing his papers. "Director Eddie," Allie called out gently, her voice grateful yet cautious. He turned around, his demeanor still calm and approachable. "I want to thank you for what you did today. I can't quite express how grateful I am, but I have one question." Allie paused for a moment, trying to remain composed. "Who filmed that video?" Eddie smiled softly, his eyes lighting up slightly. "Allie, you don't need to thank me. What I did was not just for you personally, but for the entire hospital. Everyone who works here deserves respect, and our work environment must be fair." Allie nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words, yet her curiosity persisted. "But that video, who filmed it? I don't think anyone was in the room at that time, and to record a private conversation like that, who helped me?" Eddie took a deep breath, then looked Allie directly in the eyes. "Allie, what matters is not who filmed the video, but why the video exists. Everything I do is for the benefit of the hospital and the patients. The people who work here must behave ethically, fairly, and with respect for each other. The video was merely a way to expose the truth, to ensure justice is served." He paused, then continued, his voice grave and earnest. "You don't need to worry about who filmed the video. What's important is that today, the truth was brought to light, and we can begin a new chapter where everyone has the opportunity to work in a fair and safe environment." Allie felt the certainty and resolve in Eddie's words. He did not want her to delve into unnecessary details, but instead reminded her to focus on what really matters: building a better environment for the hospital where both patients and staff are respected. She realized that Eddie had stood up not just for her, but for a comprehensive change in the entire organization. Allie gave a small smile, knowing she needed no further questions. "Thank you, Director. I understand." Eddie nodded, his expression softer. "Continue to do good work, Allie. This hospital needs people like you." Allie felt somewhat relieved. She turned to leave the room but suddenly noticed David standing at a distant corner, his gaze still fixed on the screen where the video had been played. David seemed to sense Allie's gaze and turned to look at her. In that moment, their eyes met. There was something in David's look: understanding, empathy, and perhaps even pride. Without a word, David winked at Allie, a small but meaningful gesture. Allie paused for a moment, a thought fleeting through her mind. Could it have been David who helped her? Was he the one who filmed that video? She wasn't sure, but it seemed less important now. Allie simply smiled at David, saying nothing. In that moment, no explanation was needed. They both understood that they were on the same side. Finally, after weeks of investigation and internal review, the verdict was delivered. Ina and Mrs. Margaret were officially dismissed for discriminatory behavior and professional misconduct. This decision marked a turning point for St. Mary's Hospital and sent a strong signal that injustice would no longer be tolerated in this work environment. Director Eddie, after announcing the verdict, took it upon himself to thoroughly review the entire hospital system. He didn't stop at addressing the wrongdoings, but also ensured that all procedures, management systems, and work culture at the hospital were improved to prevent any future occurrences of discrimination or injustice. During this process, Eddie decided to place two trusted individuals, known for their capability and professional ethics, into the important managerial positions vacated by Ina and Mrs. Margaret. These individuals were seasoned professionals who deeply understood the value of fairness and respect in the workplace. "I trust that the people I have appointed will bring about positive and lasting change to the hospital," Eddie stated in a meeting after announcing the appointments. "We need individuals who are not only professionally competent, but also know how to lead with integrity and compassion. They will ensure that St. Mary's Hospital remains a place where both patients and staff are treated fairly and with decency. Allie and her colleagues watched these changes with hope. The arrival of the new leaders brought a fresh breeze, not just in procedures, but also in the cultural interactions at the hospital. The work atmosphere gradually became more positive and united. Gone were the disdainful looks and discriminatory attitudes, replaced instead by collaboration and solidarity among staff. A new chapter had begun for St. Mary's Hospital, bringing with it hope for a more equitable and compassionate environment. Here, everyone, from staff to patients, would be respected and protected. That evening, Allie and David took a bus home together. The interior of the bus was quiet, with streetlights casting faint glows on their faces through the window. Allie sat by the window, gazing out, while David sat next to her, maintaining a gentle silence between them. After a moment of quiet, David broke the calm of the ride. "Everything has finally settled down, hasn't it?" he said, his voice filled with relief. "The hospital is now completely different from when we first started here." Allie turned and nodded slightly. "Yes, I never thought things would change like this. But now, I feel much lighter." She smiled, looking at David, feeling the empathy from him. "Thanks for being by my side all this time." David smiled, gently placing his hand on Allie's. "No need to thank me, Allie. I was just doing what's right. And you've been very brave. You truly deserve all the recognition you've received." In that moment, they both fell into a comfortable silence, no longer feeling distant. Without the pressure of work, without the discriminatory glances, only comfort and peace remained between two friends. Allie leaned in, resting her head on David's shoulder. She felt the warmth from him, a sense of safety and trust she hadn't realized she needed. David also gently leaned his head against hers, saying nothing more, but their silence seemed to communicate everything that was left unsaid. The bus rolled steadily on, carrying Allie and David towards a future they both looked forward to. This story ends here. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the warm stories I put my heart into bringing to you. Your support is a precious motivation for me to continue this journey, and I am incredibly grateful to have you as part of it.